Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the warm welcome. Pascal, you set me up. I've got very little time to talk with you this morning, and so I want to talk with you about something that's emerged for me after 30 years of doing this work in the context of the world that we're looking at, which is quite different than it was when I started doing diversity work many, many years ago. We're dealing with changes, profound changes in terms of the kind of things that we're looking at, and I believe that it calls for us as diversity practitioners to really reinvent the way that we're looking at our work if we're going to reach people in new ways. We know when we're looking at the workplace, marketplace, and workforce issues that we're dealing with that it's obvious to anybody rationally that we have to pay attention to this. The very fact that we're having meetings like this now all over the world, I mean, in our company we work not only throughout the United States, 47 of the 50 United States, but in dozens of other countries, and everywhere we go this issue is emerging. Almost everywhere businesses are beginning to say, yes, we need to do this, and yet for some reason, at the same time as we're saying that rationally, something else is happening under the surface. So I want to talk about what that is and how we begin to apply it, and I want to start with a story. This is a copy of a typewriter keyboard or a computer keyboard. Most of us are very familiar with the QWERTY keyboard, and yet very few people know the story of where it came from. The QWERTY keyboard was invented first in 1878 by a guy named Christopher Latham Sholes, who was the inventor of the Remington Standard, which was the original successful typewriter. It became the industry standard back in the 19th century and was for many years the only typewriter. And when he invented the original typewriter, he had the keyboard set up in alphabetized letters. It made perfect sense. And any of you who, when you were first learning to type, probably like me, asked the question, why is the keyboard all confused like this? And so what he did was, the problem was that the early typewriters had such poor spring mechanisms that they stuck a lot. And as a result of that, it was virtually unusable. So he went to one of his assistants, a guy named James Densmore, and he said, what I want you to do is confuse the keys as much as possible so that people will have to slow down in order to type. And by slowing down, they'll actually be able to type faster because there'll be fewer jams. It was a masterful stroke of anti-technology. It worked so effectively that it became an industry standard. And even though many other types, this is the most popular type that was invented, the Dvorak keyboard, which, as you can see, has the main vowels on the left side, the main consonants on the right. It was scientifically figured out to be easier to use, to be more efficient, learn quicker, and yet nobody adopted it. In fact, if we look at what we're using now, of course, in all the keyboards, or virtually all the keyboards, we still use the QWERTY keyboard. Why? Because that's the way we do things around here. This is the mindset of human beings. The enemy of the great is the good. We change only, usually, when there's a desperate need. And this is the challenge that we have where diversity and inclusion is concerned right now, I say, because we can get people to sign charters, and they're important. We can work together to get everybody to understand the reason that's important. All of these things are important, and yet most of us still see that we have challenges in terms of how this works. So what I want to do now today with the short time that I have with you this morning is to talk about 5 themes that are really rocking the world of diversity. They really call us to work and look differently, to bring ourselves as practitioners up to a higher level, to work with the people who we're working with to take ourselves to a different point of understanding and a deeper level of understanding so that we can reach people, so that we can get people to meet us and to join us in this desire that we have to create an equitable workplace, an equitable society for everybody. The first is globalism and cultural competency. Now, once again, we know that the world is very different than it was before. Just as an example, of the 60 most populated cities in the world, only 5 today are in the US or Europe. And that's an astonishing change from 30, 40 years ago. Only 5 out of the top 60 most populated cities in the world. And we all know this, we know what's happening in Asia, we know what's happening in large cities all over the world. We know that business centers are changing and that the call for business is changing. Where religion is concerned, 32% of the people in the world identify as being Christian. That's down more than 7% over just 20 years. Think about that, what that means in terms of religious diversity. So what does this change in globalism mean? Well, we, of course, see it in the United States in one way, but here in Europe, of course, you're seeing it even more dramatically, more quickly. the rise of immigration, people crossing borders faster than they ever have before. We have no historical precedent for knowing how to work with this. There's no playbook. Nothing to teach us how to deal with something that is beyond evolutionary into revolutionary. The numbers of people who are around. And of course, what happens is the existing system resists that change. Nationalism resists the change of all of these people crossing borders. And so, what was it that Newton said? Every action an equal and opposite reaction. And so as we have this mixing of people, we also have, the shout coming back from resistance to that, which is getting stronger and meaner and more dangerous than ever before. The second theme is innovation. And we know where innovation is concerned that diversity plays a huge role in our ability to adapt, to change, our ability to see challenges, to bring different thinking together. People crossing borders, different points of view. We actually have lots of studies today that show this. One in particular, Scott Page, a professor at the University of Michigan, who's a mathematician, interestingly enough, who studied using mathematical formulation the question of whether or not people coming together with different identity groups actually do the things that many of us in the diversity field have been doing, saying for a long time, that we increase innovation, we increase problem solving. And in fact, it can prove mathematically that it happens, with one caveat, and that is that we have to be able to understand each other. And I don't mean just in language, obviously. We have to be able to understand our mindsets, our different ways of thinking, our different value systems. And if we can do that, then we know that we can increase our ability to produce results. We can increase our ability to innovate, to deal with ongoing issues. But just throwing people together and expecting to work it out is not enough. In fact, that creates more tension, more difference. The third, and I think this one is very important, especially for those of us who are in organizations, is understanding the way systems work. See, for a lot of us in the diversity space, what we've seen is that we've noticed that we do diversity as a series of events. So we have a diversity training, or an international food celebration, or some similar event, and then we check off diversity. But I don't know any serious business issue that's ever conducted in that way. What diversity really requires, if we're going to change our organizations, if we're going to change the fundamental cultures in which we work, is an understanding of how the whole system works in our organizations. And that means that I realize this is very complex. We obviously don't have the time to go through it, but what that means from an organizational development standpoint is understanding how our entire organization works. So understanding what the mission, vision, and values are, and what the organizational culture is like. Understanding what the history of our organization is, because we know that our histories give us the way we look at things. I mean, how many of you know of something in your organization that you do on a daily basis, and when you ask people why we do it this way, the response is, that's just the way we do it around here. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Yeah? Right? We can't explain why, this is just the way we do it around here. And so, that background, understanding the history, how we've gotten to where we are, is so important, particularly where these issues of diversity and inclusion are concerned. Because when we look at most business organizations, they were created by people who look like this, with the norms, the values, the ways of operating that people who look like this think like. Now that doesn't mean that people consciously created those organizations to exclude everybody or anybody. Now sometimes, of course, that happened. But when you're setting up an organization and you want things to be done right, whose right are you going to choose? Always our own. This is the way we work. So we have to really fundamentally look and understand how those things were created if we're going to change them. And then, of course, the environment that we're dealing with. We know when we look at today's environment in terms of things like Islamophobia and other fears that are in the world today, the economy and how that tightens people up and has people fear the other even more. So all of these things are in the background as we approach our work. And then, as we enter the work, how do we bring people into the organization, interview, recruit, or hire them? What are the things that we do to create a culture or structure? What benefits do we provide? What do we measure? How do we promote people? And are we clear who gets promoted and who doesn't? How do we use employee resource groups or communicate? All of these kinds of issues. And then finally, externally, What are our relationships with the vendors, the marketing, public relations, developing business, and our customers? So we have to develop a way to holistically look at all of these issues if we're really going to change our organizations in any sustainable way. The third, and this one is something that I think is profoundly important to us in understanding what's going on in the world today, and that is understanding that we're shifting from a world of hierarchy to a world of networks. And we see this happening, of course, all over the world. We see it relative to social networking and what's available today. And of course, it's demonstrating itself in terms of all of the various things that we're noticing happening. We've got over 800 million members now on Facebook around the world. And it's increasing at a level of rapidity that's so fast that it's become normal, even for those of us who sign up for Facebook and don't really know how to use it or don't use it very much. But we know we have to be on Facebook. And then, of course, what's going on around the world relative to these social movements. Whether it's the Tea Party movement or the Occupy movements or the social movements that are happening in the Arab Spring or around the world here in Europe, the kinds of things that we're seeing on an everyday basis. As a matter of fact, in a 4-month period, Occupy movement showed up in 900 cities. Now think about that relative to the movements that have occurred around the world historically, movements that took years and years and years to develop. Instead, we had movements in 900 cities in 4 months. And of course, it's gone even beyond that now. It's become commonplace. We no longer have to, I remember in the old days coming out of the civil rights movement in the States, where we had to be at the Mimeo machine. Some of you don't even know what a Mimeo machine is. The old machines, we had to crank and then we had to go out at night and distribute flyers and nail them up to telephone poles and things like that. Now this is how, or stick them in windshield wipers on cars. Now we send a note out to Facebook, and within a matter of hours, millions of people know we're going to be doing something at Tahrir Square in Egypt. And people show up. And so this is not only occurring outside in that way, but it's also occurring in our organizations. People sending notices around quickly. All of a sudden movements develop at a rapid speed. And at the same time, we know that there's certain things that can't be done without hierarchy. For example, when we're on a boat in a storm, a sailboat in a storm, you don't call everybody together and say, what do you think? You know, it's a time for the captain of the ship to say, you go here, you go here, you go here. So we know that all of that's happening. And this, for me, is one of the most fascinating, and that is the breakthroughs that we're having in the cognitive sciences. We've learned more about the brain and the mind and the way it works in the last 15 years than we've known in all of history before that. And what it's teaching us is that bias is as normal as breathing. I'm not saying it makes bias good, but I'm saying it's teaching us that it's completely normal. What that means is our way of approaching it, our way of dealing with it has to be quite different. Let me give you just a few quick examples. I'm going to show you a quick video clip. I'm sure some of you have seen this. Let's take a, actually, let me see what this first. I apologize. Actually, we'll do this one first. So just to show you an example of how the mind works. I'm showing you this image. Raise your hand if you see a discernible image in this picture. If you know what this picture is of. Nobody. Let me put another slide over top and see if it makes it a little clearer. And now what do you see? You see the cow? Right, so here are 2 eyes, 2 ears, the nose, this is the forehead. He's looking at us. Does everybody see it now? Okay, good. Don't worry if you don't see it, we'll do a remedial session later. Now watch what happens when I take off the superimposed picture. Now do you see the cow? Yes, the 2 eyes again, the ears, and the nose. All of a sudden something is visible that wasn't there before. If I show you this an hour from now, you'll still see the cow. If I show it to you a week from now, you'll still see the cow. As a matter of fact, can you look at this picture now and not see the cow? See, the mind is quite remarkable. Things appear that were invisible moments before. Each of us, based on our background of experience, based on our identities, based on the things that we've encountered in our life, see different things from each other. We can't help but do that. It's the way the mind works. We also miss certain things. I'm now going to show you the video clip. It'll just take about a minute. It's from a British advertisement. But what I'd like you to do is to count the number of times the team in white in this picture catches the basketball. How many people have seen this before? I know several people. Okay, good. So you obviously let other people come to there. See if you can count the number of times.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
This was part of an advertising campaign that was used in London to make people more aware of bicycle riders. But how did we not see that bear? And by the way, if you didn't see it, don't feel bad. The same is true for about 40 to 50% of people who see this for the first time. We don't see the bear because we're focused on something else, of course. This is a phenomenon that psychologists call selective attention. This is the way the human mind works. And we now have studies, and in writing my book, I probably looked at 200 different research studies about this in all of these different areas. Every kind of area that you can imagine. The question is not, do we have bias? The question is, which are ours? Because every human being has bias. It's fundamental to the way we think. It's fundamental to our survival. Think about it. Somebody comes up to you with a knife in their hand and goes like this. You don't say, I wonder what that is and what he's going to do with it. You immediately go into fight or flight, because that's the way we survive. Now, the challenge is, of course, that those biases are intensely problematic when we're dealing with as many different kinds of people on a daily basis as we're dealing with today. And so, if we understand what this data is teaching us, what it's saying is that 90% of the things that happen where people are differentially impacted because of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their age, is not because people consciously do it. It's because people don't even realize, people like you and I, don't even realize that we're doing it. So, given that that's the case, given these 5 dynamics that we're talking about, and of course these are not the only dynamics, they're just 5 I chose given this morning that I have such a short time with you. What are some of the competencies that we need to develop as diversity professionals in order to be successful in this world? The first is that we have to rigorously and continuously develop cultural competency. And I mean culture now in the broadest sense. To understand how other people think, to understand how they're framing the world, to understand the mental models and the behaviors. And this goes way beyond kiss, bow, and shake hands. This goes, what's important to you? What are you seeing that I'm not seeing? What are you feeling that I may not be feeling? How do you express all of that? And do I understand, and am I able to bring humility, cultural humility, to listen and try to understand that, even when I don't agree with you, to understand that in your world, that's normal. The second is to let go of the proprietary mindsets that we have sometimes in diversity. You know how sometimes we get, this is mine, the diversity departments, or the HR departments, and to look at how we integrate everywhere by looking for ways to bring diversity into the problem-solving mix. How do we embed diversity and inclusion into everything we do in our organizations, whether we're businesses or civic organizations, not-for-profits, healthcare, whatever it is, so that diversity becomes one of the lenses through which we look at every part of the jobs that we're doing. How do we study systems thinking and true culture change methodologies and practice them? And for a lot of us who came into diversity from social action, that means that we need to put ourselves on a hard study program to understand how organizations really change, how organization development works, how we influence people. To constantly explore technology and how it can help us forward this work. How do we use the social networks that we have and the ability to reach people, to educate people, to motivate people, to connect people, to transform people's lives? And lastly, and most important, to focus on our being more than our doing. Because who we're being about this issue is what touches people. You see, if we come in as diversity practitioners pointing fingers and blaming people, looking for the racist and the sexist or whatever in the room, conducting find them and fix them trainings, then what do you think we get in response? Especially for people whose bias is unconscious. What we get is this. But if we come in with our own humility, understanding that we do this as much as anybody else does, then we have the opportunity to connect with people, to be in partnership with them, and to move them forward. So I want to close with this picture. This is an aspen tree, a forest of aspen trees in Colorado. And the reason I have this picture up is because this aspen tree forest, all of these many trees, is actually the largest single organism in the world. It's connected by a common root system. It looks like individual trees, but it's actually one huge organism connected by common root systems. For me, that's a perfect metaphor for who we are as human beings. We see each other as individuals. We see each other as different from each other. What we forget so often is that we're connected by this common root system of humanity. And it's only when we can come to each other like that and tap into that commonality with each other that we have a prayer changing the world. Thank you so much.